Welcome to the History Nerds United podcast. I am your head nerd, Brendan. Today, author Emily Lynn Paulson and her book, Hey Hun, about her breakup with MLMs, otherwise known as multi-level marketing companies. You know, the ones that people are always selling stuff on Facebook and really trying to sell it. It's a great conversation. I love the way Emily looks at things, and she's so open about what she thinks and what she's trying to do and all that stuff. It was an absolute delight, so I'm going to shut up so you can hear from Emily. Let's bring her on. And here we are with author Emily Lynn Paulson. Hey Hun, Sales, Sisterhood, Supremacy, and the Other Lies Behind Multi-Level Marketing. Emily, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Emily, let me start off with a simple one, because I really feel like everyone knows what this is, but I asked a few questions and some people didn't. What's an MLM? And what else might it be called? Because I just watched a TikTok that you did where you list off like 6 other things that they'll call it. So what's an MLM?
Yeah. Well, and first of all, on that note, if someone is trying to convince you that their MLM is not an MLM, like that's the first biggest red flag. But it comes under a lot of monikers: social selling, network marketing, direct marketing, direct selling, social commerce, and who knows what else they're going to come up with next to try and make it not MLM. And it's because MLM gets a bad rap because they should. And it's really what it sounds like: multi-level marketing. So it's unsalaried people who pay to join a company, to join a system. They buy a business kit, anywhere from $50 to several $1,000s, depending on the company. And then they have to turn around and then duplicate that process and sell to other people. And the biggest part that makes it multi-level is the collecting of human beings. The majority of sales in MLMs come from recruiting other humans, not from the actual sales of products.
And I guess I should say, as kind of a disclaimer, your book is obviously not very complimentary of MLMs. And I am not in any way going to try and stop you from saying anything bad about MLMs, because I also absolutely hate them. So let's just put our bias out there, right? We're not looking at the other side. The other side sucks. Neither here nor there. Well, while I've said that, and I think it's something very important that you point out at the beginning of the book, we both have a problem with MLMs, but you make it very clear that you don't have a problem with the people within MLMs. What do you mean when you say that?
Well, I was in one for 7 years. And so I have a deep understanding of why people join. There's lots of reasons people join, whether it's, they feel lonely because they're a stay-at-home mom, or they believe the dreams that are being sold. It's really all about like hope. And a lot of people join for very, very good reasons. I would say most people do. So I never fault the people who join, because I was one of those people. I get it. Everyone's a victim who is in an MLM. And unfortunately, they're also predators because they then bring other people in.
And I think you specifically say that you yourself was both a victim and a perpetrator.
Oh, yeah.
And it's within this structure that MLMs have. It's almost like a triangle. Maybe if you move the triangle, or maybe it's a pyramid. We should say it's a pyramid.
Yeah, that's more accurate.
My question for you is, it makes perfect sense, right? Because at the time you're selling it, you're also being used. And I've thought about this whenever I read anything about an MLM. At what point do you, in this pyramid, we'll call it, at what point do you become just the perpetrator as opposed to the victim? Because, there are so many levels of victims in here, and you really highlight both of those things in the book. At what point do you get to the level where it's like this person is just preying on other people and not actually trying to do anything good?
Right. I think the point that I got to when I finally quit, I was at the point where there were so many people on my team, quote, air quotes, basically anyone who's in the organization underneath me who I make money off of. There were enough people that no matter how many people quit, how many people failed, didn't matter. There was enough money flowing up to me that I really didn't have to do a whole lot. And that was the biggest red flag, finally. That was really the last straw that I said, oh my gosh, I am literally doing nothing, and all of this money is flowing up to me. And that is a very, very small percentage. It's the 0.0005% of people who ever get to that point where you don't necessarily personally have to talk to people anymore or reach out to people. It's all the people you've brought in before you doing all of the work and reaping none of the benefits. They're all going up.
I really have to compliment you, your first book, Highlight Reel, and Hey Hun. It's no holds barred for you. Right? Like in this book, there are multiple instances where I'm like, you know what? She could have cut out that sentence and made herself look better. I'll just be honest. There was a couple of times like, oh, Emily, come on.
Again? Gosh.
Oh, I thought we learned this lesson, Emily. Come on. But I think it's really important to just highlight what's going on and that you also recognize what happened. Is that something you're actively thinking about when you're writing, like, this has to be in here, like people need to know what happened, exactly how it did?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I feel like one of the reasons I wrote the first book was reading quit lit, really that genre of books, it's like people getting sober and their inspirational tale. I read a lot of things that resonated with me and a lot of similarities, but I didn't really find my story. And it was like failing over and over and over and making mistakes over and over and over. And I thought, I cannot be the only one out there who has lived this life and had this pattern throughout their life. And so that's a story I wanted to have out there. So I felt like it was really important to just be honest about the whole thing. And I had been someone in my life who was compartmentalized in a lot of ways. I was this person to these college friends, and I was this person to these, work friends, and I was this person to my parents and this person to my boyfriend or whatever. And aligning all of those as the same person was really important to me.
So what was the impetus that you said you had to write Hey Hun? Highlight reel, I think I don't need to ask what the impetus was for you say exactly what it was. People know that MLMs suck. Why did you need to write Hey Hun though?
So a few reasons. I mean, selfishly, having written a book before, knowing how cathartic it was, how healing it was definitely that for me. So it was really a living amends for me of, hey, I've been complicit in this system for a really long time. And here's a lot of things that I said throughout the years that I found out later to be bullshit. And I expected everyone to believe it. And now here's what's really true. I think it's when you know better, you do better. When you see something, you talk about it. And so I wanted to do something that was just as disruptive in the other way as the thousands of people I recruited into this scheme.
Now, one of the really complications here is, like, for instance, in this book, in case everybody's going to, oh, I can't wait to see which one it is, you actually don't name your previous MLM. Why is that?
Because they're all the same. And I really, when I started writing this book, I thought I would somehow make it more obvious which one it was. And then as I started doing research and researching all MLMs, I found the failure rate was the same across the board. The tactics were the same across the board. The difference was the products being sold. That was really it. And so the tenets that are there, the coercive control and all of those cultish things that are part of the MLM structure are the same across the board. And I thought, it doesn't matter what company I'm calling out here. It's really a system-wide problem.
It's got to be difficult from a, writing technical perspective. You're writing about your own life, right? Which means there's real people going on. Your husband, St. Kale, I'm just going to call him St. Kale. And there's other people in your life that, sometimes people don't want to be in a book. So you say right up front, everything in the book is real, but you might do a composite here. You might compress time a little bit. How do you make those decisions when you're writing the book? Because, right, it's so easy to be like, well, now I can't believe what she's saying because this is not exactly how it happened. How do you write that without feeling like you might be misleading people?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very delicate balance. I think you have to respect the fact that if there are other people who are part of your story, you're protecting them. And as long as you're telling a story in a manner where, any random person off the street couldn't say, oh, that's Brendan Dowd that you're talking about, and here's his address and his phone number. I mean, if people outside of the system wouldn't know who you're talking about, then they're protected. I wanted to take it a step further. It really isn't so much about the specific people in the book as it is about the personalities in the book, because a lot of the things that were said to me, and I know some of it as people are reading are shocking. Like, I can't believe someone said that to you or someone asked you to do that. It wasn't just that one person to me necessarily. This was something that was coached over and over throughout the system. And so again, it didn't matter if I said, oh, this was Sally or this was Sue or whoever it was. Really combining people into personalities and where they were in the structure was the important part of the story. Does that make sense?
Absolutely does, because it made me think about, I know I have a few friends who are in MLMs. They're good people. It's very funny. I remember having my own experience. I was working, and this guy told me about this workshop that he was at for the weekend. And he started just saying things to me when I started out, kind of saying, like, no, that's not really for me. And I am from New York. I'm a very straightforward person, for better or worse. And I remember he said some things that were slightly insulting, but not so insulting that I'd probably punch him at work. He threw three of them out of there, and I'm like, this doesn't sound like him at all. And I said, oh, so did they give you a list? He's like, what? I'm like, did they give you a list of what to say when people were not immediately saying yes to you? No, I don't know what you mean. I'm like, oh, they must have just told you it during it. And then he stopped talking about it entirely. Is that what we're talking about?
Oh, yeah, you're given scripts. I have a file full of scripts that I was given. What to say to someone who says they work too much, what to say to someone who just had a baby, what to say to someone who just left their job. Every situation you can think of, cut and paste, cut and paste, cut and paste, because that's what it was. You were really training someone on the system of operation. It's the coercion. It's the systematic breaking down of what you would actually do. Like, you wouldn't really say this to somebody, but when you're told it's part of the way, the ladder to success, you're more likely to do it, even if it's like super cringy.
And it seems like there is a certain level. I'm seeing this a lot more lately now that I pay attention to it. There's also a certain level where it's no longer about the words. It's about how you look. I've noticed a few who have gotten up higher in MLMs. All of a sudden, there's one day where it's, oh, they lost 40 pounds. And they're tanned constantly, and they're doing this. And all of a sudden, the videos where they'd wake up in the morning and say, this is what I'm doing, like they're looking more made up as soon as they get on the video and things like that. I'm guessing that happens pretty much everywhere too.
Yeah. And I think that's part of just the whole influencer culture and having to take everybody with you everywhere and, being on all the time. But part of being an MLM is taking on the MLM as your entire personality. And you wouldn't do that with any other job. No job would ever become such a huge part of your personality, but it's your lifestyle. Everybody involved they're not just acquaintances, they're your team and they're your tribe and all of this stuff. It becomes just this next level thing where you see women start dressing the same and wearing the same stupid hats and posing the same and using the same filters and going to the same places. And it's very copy paste.
Emily, this doesn't make sense to me because whenever I see an MLM, they always say, work however much you want, work from wherever you want. Are you telling me that they're not giving the whole truth up front?
Well, work wherever you want means work everywhere. That's the rub, is that this whole time freedom really means now you're going to be working all the time. And you will notice it now when you see, women in the hospital who've just had a baby and, oh, look, I'm still able to work my business when I just pushed out a baby. It's like, what are you doing? Don't do that. You should be focusing on your baby. But it's so ingrained that, oh, this works in the nooks and crannies of my life. You should not be working that much. It's like the hustle culture, boss babe mentality all rolled into this really toxic thing.
Speaking of toxic, I have noticed, and I wonder if there's any numbers to back this up. It seems like MLMs target a certain type of human being. Would I be incorrect to say that?
No, not at all. It's a very homogeneous look. And there really is an avatar of the kind of vulnerable, probably stay-at-home mom, maybe with a job, has a couple of kids, white lady. I mean, there is definitely an avatar.
They don't even have the respect to take advantage of all races. That's really where MLMs really tick me off, because they are taking advantage of the avatar that you're talking about. It's this person is at home, and you were this person. You talk about you're at home. You want to feel more connection outside, and they're selling this thing that, oh, this is going to fulfill you. This is going to do all this, and they're just selling you a facade from day one, right?
Well, yeah, and it just so happened in my case that 0.0005% happened to come true for me because I was the perfect candidate to begin with. I was really one of the first people to get in my area. My area wasn't saturated yet. I had a lot of friends who were also well-heeled. They had husbands who had jobs and, they weren't hurting for money. And so I really was primed with this network of people who were ready to buy crap that they didn't need or join a company that they didn't need to join. And so I really ran with that. It's like, oh, here's the dream. And now the dream is being fulfilled. And until I realized it was not working for anybody else. And they were working just as hard as me. And all of these things, it's really hard to kind of give up on that dream when you're like, it worked for me. It seemed to be working for me, but it wasn't working for other people.
I also think a lot of people will look at someone who gets stuck in an MLM and they're like, well, she doesn't have the best judgment, or maybe she didn't do that. You're a chemist. I mean, you're a highly educated person, right? You have been through some trials and tribulations. Read the first book, by the way, if you need to know exactly what those are. But an MLM can get you because of, it seems, where you're at emotionally. Like if you don't have the finances, it's one thing, but they're really going to take advantage of people emotionally, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a salve to your loneliness when you are at home with kids and you don't necessarily have a connection with a lot of people in a way you think you should, or you've been out of the workforce for a while and it's not in the cards necessarily to go back right now. And this is like, oh, this is a solution. This is the only thing that I can do right now. And then you have this hope that maybe I can earn this car and maybe I can earn this, vacation or whatever. It definitely preys on that just hope that people have.
Speaking of the lifestyle, how important is alcohol to this lifestyle?
Oh, very. And I talk about this a lot in the book because it's really, it's an escape. For me, it was an escape. Drinking was an escape already. And so when I joined this thing, I bought this business kit that was this other escape or this other distraction. And it really required drinking more. It's like I combined two of my favorite things. I could meet clients out and prospective, pray, whatever, and grab a glass of wine and talk about skincare. Like, wow, that's such a perfect, fun thing to do. And unfortunately, it just creates a need for itself because then I just needed to do more of that. And you go on these retention events, you go to these conventions and conferences and business opportunities. And it was always cocktails and conversations and, wine and opportunity, and everything went along with alcohol. And of course, that's not singular to MLMs, but it was very ingrained in the culture.
Oh, yeah. No, the alcohol thing would be, it's totally, completely separate podcast and go on for that for a while. My thinking too, I mean, that's literally how you got pulled into this, right? You wanted a night out with the ladies. Somebody reached out to you. And of course, one of the first things that happened when you walk in the door is, here's your drink.
Yep.
Maybe you'll sign up for this now.
Yep. And it's like that social lubrication, right? It's kind of wears down your intuition, and MLMs are all about wearing down your intuition.
I need to ask somebody about this who's been in it. When they do these stadium events, and they all do these stadium events, doesn't anyone think, wow, this is a tremendous waste of money? Like this could be an email. Like this is the ultimate, this could have been an email. What are you people doing? I mean, it's part of the mind control, right? To bring you into a stadium and say, here's your new thing.
100%. It is the absolute pinnacle of the mind control. And the reason, those things cost a lot of money, but all of those women are paying to be there. And I say women over and over because 80+% of people in MLMs are women. 80+% of the people who lose money in MLMs are women. And I'm a woman, so that's just the verbiage I use, just a side note. But these stadiums filled up with people who have all paid hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars to be there, right? So they've paid their way, they've paid the company. And then the people training, the people who are doing the keynote sessions and all this stuff are almost all consultants in the company. And so company's not paying for them. So the money is only going one direction when you look at it. And they may pay for a headliner or a musical act or something, and then everyone who's there then is purchasing the new latest, greatest product that is being unveiled there. So it is a cash cow for the company, even if they have to pay for this event to begin with. And then it just, the belief that comes out of these things, it can last the entire year till the next convention and the next fall, because they're so electrifying. They're so magnetizing. The people who are speaking, there's people walking the stage and lights and glamour, and you just feel like, oh, this is so moving. I want more of this. It's more than just skincare. It's more than just selling eye cream. It's a movement. It's very brainwashing. That's the only way to describe it.
It must be very stressful in the R&D department that every year they got to figure out a new next big thing, right? Thank God you didn't work in that, right?
It's always a game changer. It's always, this is the new disruptive game changer. It's like, oh my God, again?
You just touched on, for me, what the book is different from a lot of other places where you're going to read bad things about MLMs. And there's good podcasts on it and all this stuff. If I had to pick one thing from the book, is that you actually break down the nuts and bolts of, hey, you're not actually making money. Even if you look like you're making money, the dirty little secret is what you've talked about, and you do it through everything, is that, hey, just because I made this number doesn't mean I made this number, right? Just because you're one of the top sellers does not mean you're coming home counting your $100 bills and buying whatever you want. Like, there is just all sorts of asterisks at the end of everything with an MLM, right?
Oh yeah, it's caveat city everywhere. And it's done again. Everything's done by design. The income disclosures that already look really bad. I mean, if you really look at them, they already look terrible. Like, nobody makes any money, but those don't include like expenses that you have day to day. They don't include babysitters or costs of products that you have to purchase, or even the business kit itself that you have to purchase to join, website fees, nothing, fees for convention. And so when you calculate all that in, it's all that much worse. But again, they will just kind of shoo those concerns away to people, like, oh, the reason it looks bad is because X, Y, and Z, and all of these excuses. And it's so interesting because it's just right there in black and white. And it wasn't until experiencing it and realizing, wow, I'm really not making that much money. Or, look how much my taxes are at the end of the year, or wow, look at how much this car payment is, or wow, it's never what it seems, ever.
And I think it's very important to point out right now, you are a freaking superstar. You're not, oh, sour grapes, I never made money or anything like that. You were near the very pinnacle, right? When somebody goes into this and says, I really hope, like, you won the MLM lottery. Mm-hmm. And even you're saying, like, it's not that good. It's not that worth it. And I mean, we haven't even talked about, what did it do to your relationships?
Yeah, it was really destructive in a lot of ways. And while I was in it, I would not have said this. And until the very end, when I started to realize, I really thought the people who were my closest, nearest, dearest friends at the time were all really friends. And a lot of it was just proximity, because you start spending so much time with these people, whether it's online on Zoom calls or at retention events or business opportunity or wherever, but they're not friendships. It's really proximity. And even if there's friendships tucked inside, like, obviously I recruited a lot of my friends and we were still friends, that time spent together was all this weird, quote unquote, business work sessions, whatever you want to call it. And it really strains friendships when you have friendships on a hierarchy. When you're bringing in friends and your paycheck depends on them, for example, when you are trying to recruit a friend and they're telling you no over and over, when a friend is purchasing from you and you just need to make these month-end numbers and you're bugging them to buy something that they don't really need, but you're taught that they're not supporting you if they don't buy from you. So it's this weird transactional layer that's added to real friendships. And it's this weird fake friendship that's put on things that aren't really friendships. So it's only until, like, coming out the other side of it that you can kind of see the fallout. And I didn't realize how much it had strained my relationship, like with my brother and my mom. And even though it wasn't like we stopped talking to each other or anything, but they were always leery. And to me, that meant, oh, you don't support me. And until I had friends who kind of came out of the woodwork and were like, yeah, I had to distance myself from you, or I had to block you on Facebook because you got so wrapped up in all things girl boss, that I realized how much it did affect my friendships.
I think I might have a little bit of that. I think people want me to shut up about the podcast, but unlike you, I refuse to see the light, and I'm just going to keep plowing through. But neither here nor there. That was another part that was kind of chilling for me when you talked about recruiting people and how cold it got. it was, okay, Rachel might bring in Jesse. So we get Jesse on the phone. And then as soon as Jesse's off the phone, it's like, yeah, we'll just keep working on her and, do this and say this. And, she's really looking for money. So make sure you highlight that. They become a number on a spreadsheet. Like it felt like you weren't talking to a human.
Right. And again, by design, because you're taught like some will, some won't, who cares next? I can't tell you how many times I heard that people are just numbers. It's a numbers game. And the only way to get people to join you is to talk to lots of people about it because it's a numbers game. So you really start to visualize people as numbers. Even if you don't want to feel that way about people, that's what it becomes. And you have lists of people written down. And when they say no, you cross them out or you put them on a new list. And it's this weird, like mathematic Tetris of people all the time.
God forbid you actually sell some product every now and again.
Right.
You know what I mean? Well, I know you talk about this in the book and we won't go into detail, but you leave an MLM, it's like leaving a cult. There's going to be blowback. There's going to be people who write you off. Are you seeing blowback from now this next step of actually writing a book about it? Like, have things gotten worse? Are there people who just left you alone that are now like, hey, don't do this?
The most blowback I hear is from people who haven't read it and probably won't read it, who just assume that it's the worst, who just assume I'm just, talking trash about people in the MLM, or I don't know what they think, but it's the people who probably need to use critical thinking and probably need to read it who won't read it. And that's what I hear is the people who were in maybe my former MLM or others who think she's just a hater, who it's just this blanket statement. If I'm saying anything negative about the structure, then I must be a hater, which really is the most culty way to think about it. Because there are plenty of people who still are in the same company who are like, I can't wait to read it, who understand that you can think critically, that you can have criticisms about something that maybe you still want to be involved in, but don't totally believe in. But there's no middle ground. It's very black and white. Like you must be in or you must be out. And if you're out, you're on the other side and you're a hater.
And you talk about this too, like this isn't something where all of a sudden you have your epiphany and the next day you're out of the MLM. And you talk about it too. It's a process. It's a process of your eyes open and then you start asking these questions. And it would be great if you were a superhero and woke up one day and said, never again, I'm walking away from this. But life doesn't work that way, does it?
No, it doesn't. And unfortunately, the farther you get in, you're either sucked in by the emotional aspect of it, where it's like, hey, these are all my friends now. If I left, I'd have no friends. That would suck. Or if I leave, I won't have a paycheck that I'm now accustomed to. And that would suck. Or I won't have this, or I won't have that. And so the farther it goes on, it's even harder to leave. And it's like whether it's golden handcuffs or it's the fear of retaliation or whatever it is, a lot of people stay for reasons that are completely different to the reasons that they got in the first place.
For you as an author, I read your books out of order. So I read Hey Hun and then I went back to Highlight Reel. And I was wondering, especially at the end of Highlight Reel, you start talking about your business and your this or that. Mm-hmm. How much would Highlight Reel change if you had to write it right now with this kind of next step in your, well, say development or enlightenment, whatever you want to say?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny reading it back. And I've had people who have read both books and are like, wow, you really found your voice in the second book or whatever. Because you can see reading it. And since you read them out of order, you can see that I was still kind of roped into something, even though I had my big epiphany about alcohol and how it had really weaved its way in every part of my life. My eyes weren't open to like everything that I was involved in. So if I hadn't gotten sober, I don't believe I would have ever left the MLM. That was such a huge part of me getting sober and realizing once my intuition came back online, realizing, ooh, I wouldn't do this, I wouldn't do that, wouldn't do that. So for sure, they had to be in that order, right? But going back and looking at it, I hadn't really come full circle yet. And I think Highlight Reel too, it focuses so much on how I'm working my way back, like from childhood all the way back until I stopped drinking. And it wasn't really until that point when I was able to unravel how I had been so deeply enamored with this pyramid scheme at that point, and how alcohol really fueled it, and getting sober really helped me leave. So they do interact, they overlap, and it is interesting now looking back at the first, and I could see I was still very trapped.
I don't know if you've mentioned this, that people have said you found your voice and whatnot. What I noticed is it sounds like two different authors. It really does. And especially for Hey Hun, and tell me if I'm wrong here. Hey Hun, you almost go back into selling mode, right? You start off in a way where it's kind of, hey, you know, this and that, and you're buying, kind of being light and funny and everything. And I won't say what happens, but it seems to me that your tone changes as the book goes along. Was that something intentional, or was that just something as you're writing, you're just naturally going to change your tone slightly?
Probably both, because through the editing process, of course, I've read the book now 10 bajillion times, give or take. Through the editing process, I think it's twofold. It's, as I was writing from the perspective, because I go, I write a lot about the story and then give some facts and then more story and facts. And as I'm writing about the story of myself, I take myself back to that place where it was very, I thought, light and innocent and happy and fun. And I didn't know that much then, like the blissful ignorance. And as it goes along, I'm less ignorant. I know more, and I'm more pissed off. And by the end, I've just had it. And so I think it's both. I think that myself in the story, my voice, it's a true personification of how I woke up to what I was involved in. And also as a writer, just being more clear about constantly saying, hey, this is what it is. These are the facts. This is true. This is making sure to reinforce everything with research. That it's not just I felt this way. These are what the numbers say and what all the studies say, and making sure that it was all held up with facts.
Two things there. As soon as I finished, I had my girlfriend reading, because she's like, oh, I hate MLMs too. And it was very funny. She read the first 2 chapters and she looked at me, she goes, I mean, this isn't that bad. And my answer was just, keep going.
Keep reading.
It's like, keep going. Yeah. I get what you're saying and I totally understand it. And yes, everyone who's listening, I am intentionally being cagey about it because you got to see it unfold yourself. Yeah, I just said, just keep reading, because you're going to get there and you're going to hear those things and everything. But yeah, it was a very interesting seeing it unfold. And one of the most important parts to me is at the end, you talk about, hey, if somebody's in an MLM, this is how you should talk to them. And everyone should read the book, so I don't want to go over that part. I did want to ask about this part. If you see a friend starting to tiptoe to an MLM, somebody who is in your position, right, still kind of trying to figure things out, feeling isolated, you talk about how to talk to them when they're in. How do you talk to somebody to keep them from getting in the first place?
I would throw as much in front of them as I could, because you're combating ultimately a person or a number of people who are trying to get them into this organization, right? And they are not giving them any actual data outside of the cult. They're giving them all cult-generated propaganda, everything from the company, stories from the company. And so you have to counteract that with, like a book like this, for example, give them this book, or a study from the FTC, or whatever. I mean, there's resources in the back of the book for a reason, because the information is out there, but you're not going to get it from the people who are trying to recruit you into an MLM. You are not going to get the actual real facts that you need to know. The income disclosure statement that they're going to just say, oh, that's not really real or whatever. They're going to try and dismantle all of the objections that you have. And so getting as much information in front of them as possible is really good, and possibly even showing them some of like the Facebook posts or the Instagram feeds of the people who are in the company currently, and asking, like, is this something you want to do? Does this resonate with you? Does this spammy, cold messagey kind of propaganda, is this what you want to do? And ultimately, they're probably going to say no, but that's the kind of thing that they're going to just systematically break down and make them okay with. So just getting as much information in front of them as possible, because once they're in, it's much harder to get them out.
And I'm not trying to kiss your butt here. Handing somebody Hey Hun is a good idea, because As I mentioned, the nuts and bolts are there. It's not just, oh, hey, I don't like it now and I'm pissed and like it sucks. It's, hey, so if you get this check, guess what happens to this check? And then guess what happens to the next one? And by the way, when you're 3 years in, even if you're doing well, this is the stuff you're going to deal with. And I think that's really kind of the most important part of this, right? Is that, hey, it's not just complaining or throwing something under the bus that you used to do. It's, here's why it's so corrosive.
Yeah. Exactly.
A big question I have, especially for somebody like yourself who writes about how you've done things that you now consider wrong, that you've seen. For you, there was a lot of people in there. Mm-hmm. And I kind of think about the nature of forgiveness for this, right? Because when you do something wrong, you want to say, I'm sorry. And sometimes it's very hard, especially if you're in something like this where you're talking about downlines and all of these people. Right. So for you personally, how do you lift that from yourself? How do you forgive yourself when might be too many people to physically go out and say, I'm sorry to?
Yeah, for sure. I will say that I've had a really great opportunity to apologize to people who were happy to see I was writing this book, because most people who join an MLM do, I hate to use the word fail, but according to statistics, fail because they don't make money, right? Or they quit. And because of that, most people who maybe joined me or joined somewhere on my team who then inevitably didn't continue were happy to see that I had finally realized, hey, this doesn't work. This doesn't work for everybody. And so I've had more of an opportunity than I thought to apologize, to talk to people. And almost everybody understands that, like most people who get involved in this, I really thought that I was doing a good thing. Like I really thought this was working for me. And it would be amazing if this worked for my friend Vanessa and my friend Kelly. And I wanted other people to succeed too. And that once I realized it wasn't working, I did try to, get out as quickly as possible, though I wish it were sooner. And then the people who are still in, having conversations with them and saying, hey, I was very honest about this is why I'm stepping back. This is why I'm not working anymore. This is why I'm quitting. So I was just as honest as possible. And I could really only make decisions based on the information I had at the time. And so being very clear about that. And I don't, of course, do I wish I would have quit sooner? Sure. But I can't go back and change the information I had at the time. I was doing the best I could with the information I had. And so that is just, again, for me, it's a living amends that writing this book is like the best apology I could probably think of.
Well, this might actually answer the last question I usually ask authors, which a lot of times I have history authors, so we're going to have to change this a little bit. Some people are completely against reading memoirs. I've run into that. I'm like, you should read Hey Hun. I don't read memoirs. If I put somebody like that in front of you and they said, why should I read Hey Hun? What would you say to them?
That's hard because I love nonfiction, right? It would be hard to convince me why it wasn't fun to read nonfiction. I love it. But I don't know how you learn stuff if you don't read true stories of people who have been through it, right? How do you know a topic or situation or a person or what leads people to do the things that they do, especially harmful things, and discover what makes them tick and the circumstances that leads them to make decisions unless you read about it? And so obviously I think MLMs are fascinating, but I just find it fascinating to hear the why behind why people make problematic decisions. And I do think it's important to be aware of how dangerous this very seemingly benign, fun thing is. And I also think that the book, and of course I'm patting myself on the back here, I feel like I did a very good job of trying to storytell and make it very fiction-like in the way I told the story. So it was still engaging while giving facts.
I will verify that. That is true. Because I generally don't read a lot of memoirs, but I'm like, oh, bashing MLMs, I got to see this. And it did not disappoint. So, Emily, thank you so much for coming on. Anything I can do to help your crusade against MLMs, please let me know.
Thanks.
And that's it for this episode. Thank you so much, Emily, for coming on. Hey Hun, go out and get the book or her first book, Highlight Reel. Highly recommend both of them. Hit us up, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Listen to the other episodes of the podcast. Leave us reviews, leave us comments. We'd love to hear from you nerds. Until next time, stay cool.